In this episode of Field Frequency, I sit down with Anup Parikh of Pangea Charging for an unfiltered discussion on building in the EV charging world. We talk about walking away from the illusion of corporate safety to bet on personal brand. That personal brand might be one of the most vital power sources in this industry. We talk about the nuances of EV charging technology, how market education doesn't always convert to sales, and why L2 charging might be a blind spot in commercial charging adoption. And to close out, Anoop drops a cool announcement that you'll want to stick around to find out about. So let's get into it. Today I'm joined by Anup Parikh. Hi, Anoop. How's it going?
Doing well yourself?
Doing well. Thanks for joining us. Looking forward to talking with you today. Obviously, no stranger to Field Advantage, a friend of the company.
Yeah,
But for the audience, I'd like you to just give a brief introduction of yourself, your company, your background.
sure. Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for having me. Anup Parikh, founder and owner of Pangea Charging, based down in Houston, Texas. And we're basically experts in providing EV charging to predominantly multifamily is where our expertise is. And so, of course, that translates quite well to putting that into apartments, offices, retail. It's quite similar, but definitely our bread and butter is apartments and multifamily, as we call it in the industry.
Well, so you're highly visible in social media and certainly on LinkedIn. And I've been watching your recent video clip series, been enjoying that on LinkedIn. A series from layoffs to payoffs. Obviously, the complete video series is all packaged together and available on the Pangea Charging YouTube channel. But that series is sharing your experience of being laid off, which is kind of the origin story, I think, to Pangea. And you talk about being laid off and not once but multiple times. So I think kind of telling the backstory to Pangea, I'd like to know how those layoff experiences shaped what led to Pangea versus going to work for another EV company. And just what's the story, what's it like been solopreneuring in a competitive market, what it's like been working in this EV space, and trying to get the background on Pangea really is what this question's all about.
Sure. Yeah, it's a great question, and what I love talking about is obviously can be a long answer, but I'll try to keep it short. Which is, you know, you look at 2020, right? So COVID happened, and the layoff from ChargePoint was reasoned with, hey, we're going to downsize because of COVID. Now, whether that was true for me or not, I don't know. But that was, call it spring 2020. And then I started formally Pangea Charging in October of that year. So that's roughly about 6 months in between. And in those 6 months, everything, obviously the entire economy, every kind of business took a hit. But it was probably that summer, early fall where I started to get calls from employment opportunities in the EV charging space. I remember Blink being one of them. There was Bureau Veritas. And, again, the list goes on. I'm sure many people watching know these names. And as I'd heard it, it was very much what I know Jason, too, is that, hey, we'd love for you to come in and grow essentially pipeline, business development, grow pipeline, go out, hit the ground, get these accounts. And I said, I did that once, actually multiple times. I've done that at SemiConnect, which is now Blink. I've done it at ChargePoint. And what happened at ChargePoint, right? I built a pipeline, booked revenue, and then one day suddenly you're kind of completely disconnected from that. And I just no longer wanted to do that anymore. I wanted to do it for myself, because how many times can you go building for someone and then the longevity, you get cut off? It's like now you don't get to benefit from those relationships. Now, I will say what inspired, so that was one part of not kind of taking these job opportunities, right? So all attractive, all would be easy to get back in, just pick back up like, hey, now let's make calls on behalf of this brand or this company. But it was then, I think, about 2 or 3 calls in the month of, I think, September of 2020, where they were just like, hey, I remember we'd spoke when you were at ChargePoint, so on and so forth. And these were just past contacts. And so to give you reference, I was there for like 3.5 years. So I was traveling up and down the East Coast, covered the entire eastern half of the US. So I think over 3.5 years, developed some what I would think were solid relationships, and trust, of course, being one of those factors. So yeah, I just got calls and they said, hey, we're now ready. We're looking at this. Could you help us out? And I said, I, just to be transparent, I'm no longer with this employer, but hey, would you buy that from me if I could get it for you? And he's like, sure. I don't care where I get it from. And so that kind of like opened my eyes, like, oh, here's a great opportunity. Because while I've always thought about opening a business, I think it's scary for everyone, which is like, hey, I'm just going to go hunt new business. This one fell in my lap, right? So that really gave me the confidence, like, yeah, let me just file the paperwork, do this. And that's customer number one just in the bag. And from there, you have, of course, what people would say is like a portfolio. It's a portfolio of one, but it's something I can say, hey, I've helped NRP Group, which is pretty well known in the multifamily business. So to have that as the first feather in my cap was pretty awesome. And yeah, that's where it really started.
So, you touched on a lot of things, and certainly not going to hold back from exploring this conversation around the building of a pipeline for a company that really is saying, if not indirectly, not directly, certainly indirectly, your value as personnel is determined by your pipeline. So it's literally determined by the numbers on the board. And so as you've went through that experience, you're building a pipeline, you've done it before, you could do it again. You were willing to leave the safety of an established, so you're let go. You could go to any number of companies because at this point in the space, you've got tenure in the space. So you've gained institutional knowledge, you've built a book of business, you've established credibility among customers. So you could go into the perceived safety net of established EV companies, or you could go do your own thing. And so really safety in the established EV world is really just an illusion, because if you're going to another company who's going to determine your value based upon the numbers that you place on the board, then really that is just perceived safety, because the first RIF, you'd be gone, just like anyone else, not necessarily you, but just
Yeah.
anyone else. So really, I think what you've alluded to is there was a customer that said, hey, yeah, I'll buy from you because I trust you. So really, this sounds like a discussion on personal brand over maybe guaranteed paychecks. So you were being called instead of a brand. It was Anup that was being called. So it almost sounds like your personal brand was a part of that catalyst for Pangea. Would you say that that's the case?
Yeah, I 100% believe that because I think about, I'll give you an example actually. The closest I can think about in all my time in like sales and employment and corporate America, there's one person to date that comes to mind where uh, I'll get through the conversation and see if I actually mention the company name, but I'm going to try to avoid it, which is this person worked for a company where it was in the EV charging space. And to speak to personal brand and why that matters is, we've all seen tons of movement, whether it's the EV charging space or any company, right? You go from software company A to B, and it's just like, hey, I'm selling this enterprise solution, so on and so forth. Fine, let's hear about it. But that person has less of an influence unless like, hey, this person did really good at that last company and like helped my business out in this way. So when he goes to this new software company, I know what he's talking about. So I think that's rare that people actually, not rare, but follow the person to the next company. And to give you an idea, there was a guy who worked at someone in this EV charging space where they were about to go under. And the contact I was working with was like, hey, where's my money? Like, I need this commission that is owed. And it was a challenge, a lot of friction to get that paid, but eventually got paid. That person then went on to work at another business. And he said, his first introduction to me, because a lot of people are just like, hey, I'm at this company now. Like, would you want to do business? I really respect what he did, which was, hey, I know I was at this last company. As you know, it like went under. Apologize for like how much trouble it was to get paid out on that. But I'd like to start new. And, a lot of that sort of language. And I was like, wow, impressive. You put a bookmark in my head of like, now there's trust. Now there's like, you have this really sharp professionalism of, you knew your character was unfortunately put on the line because of your company, but you're taking it upon yourself, your personal brand, to like clean that up and say, you're working with me. And I think it's rare to see that. And so to your point, I think that's what I try to do for my clients is like, listen, no matter where I'm at, it's me that you're working with. And yeah, I don't know. I find that in this economy and all that stuff, it's rare to find that people who hold accountability for themselves versus like, yeah, that's my company's problem, right? And so I think when you do that, you can build some stronger relationships no matter where you go, whether that's independent or your next employer.
Going back to your layoff to payoffs video series that's on LinkedIn, you made a strong case in that series that brands like, and maybe it was a post that was related to that. Don't want to conflate the content, but either way, you had made a post where companies like Deloitte or MD Anderson or any other brand, just fill in the blank. We don't want to signal on any particular brand, but or
Sure.
pick on anyone, but any brand, fill in the blank. They're not as powerful on their own as the people inside of these organizations that are creating the weight. Obviously, it's the human capital, and in the EV infrastructure, it's no different. It's in this EV space, trust and execution matter more than empty promises. I've been in this space for 8 years. I've worked for different hardware manufacturers. Everyone's got the best product, everyone's got the
Right.
best hardware, everyone's got the best software. But in this space where trust and execution matter more than promises around a product or a service or a software, narrowing down into talent, into the person aspect of this. How do you see that reshaping the perceived value of a company or a solution in this industry, in the EV space?
So just to make sure I understand your question, like how does you're saying personal brand like affect the?
Yeah, how is it's not the company, it's the people that will
Mhm.
bring success to this industry. Obviously it's not, we win as a team, we lose as a team. Obviously success is never attributed to a single individual, but it is the people, not the organization, that makes the case. I.e., going back to the point of the person that called you, they were scrambling around a help desk trying to get a solution, were not getting help. They called you, and then you moved the needle forward because you took ownership of that. And so that's really where I'm trying to narrow in the EV space: product, services, software, whatever the solution and service or product is in the space. It's really about the people that are creating real value versus perceived value. And so that's what I was seeing. That was my takeaway in some of the content that you've produced in the past. And so that's really what I'm alluding to.
Yeah, I mean, I'll even use you as an example, right? So, like, Jason, you've been at some phenomenal branded companies in this space. But if I didn't already previously have a contact there, there's like, I feel like people are giving value to brands actually. I don't know, maybe, yeah, I would say like, I think it's a reversal in role. Whereas it used to be brands, you'd look at someone's resume like, oh, they worked here, here, and here. I think well, look, I'm sure my opinion is very skewed, but the way I operate is I know ultimately comes down to people. When I'm picking up the phone, I'm depending on a person. When I email something, I'm depending on a person. Maybe AI will change a lot of that, but my point is from the who's picking up the phone the fastest, who's responding to email the fastest, knowing Jason's accessible by text, right? You are giving value to these companies because you work there, you're responsive, you're doing these actions on behalf of them. So, when I call you and say, hey, like, I'm trying to help a client do some service calls, it's like you're knowledgeable, right? You are adding value to, again, it could be Field Advantage, any of these companies. And so that was the point of that, is like at Deloitte, I did use that as an example, which is, I don't know, consulting, lots of tax sort of services. It's the CPA, that great CPA who's very responsive and communicates well. As soon as they leave, I'm like, like I really enjoyed working with insert name here, right? And they're gone. It's like, okay, I don't care so much about the brand. That's usually, I think, your first point of entry when you're researching like a new market. Like, who are the players? Who are the successful companies? I think that's where brand plays in. But when it comes to execution, I think it's all about the person.
Love it. Well, as we kind of bring that whole kind of topic to a close, if we were to wrap maybe a lasso around that, at its core, Pangea was built around an ethos, and that was customer first ethos with your desire to make sure that they're taken care of. And I think that that's good. I think that your personal experiences has shaped the culture that you're building and want to ingrain in the very DNA at Pangea. I mean, I think even inherent in the name, I think it's symbolic, so that's good. Shifting topics, really, in your outreach and when it comes to business development, creating opportunities, developing opportunities, etc. Education and sales. You spend a lot of time. We all do in education. EV 101 with prospects. Education tends to either be a secret weapon or a sunken cost, depending on where it's directed. What is your experience? What's common experience for you when you're talking numbers and ROI with prospects and clients?
That is a good question, and one I feel like I'd love to say the jury's still out, but maybe the jury's spoken. I'm refusing to accept it, which is it feels like a sunken cost. Almost 5 years in business, even the prospects I've educated the most, I will absolutely, and for the folks who are watching this who never met me, don't know enough about my business, I share this transparently about I'll lose on perhaps cost, because they didn't even run through the proper due diligence. They're just, hey, this Tic Tac is a couple cents and this stick of gum is $5. Well, you went with the Tic Tac, but these are different things, right? And so I think the education, people love hearing it. They're like, yeah, you sound super knowledgeable. But I don't know what it is about. That's like a separate part from the business world of like, we just care about perhaps lowest cost or something. And they're just not sharing that in that discovery call. And obviously that's on me. But I think so I'll break it down for you. Yeah. Education, 100%. Like, my business, I got into this business, one, because I love it. And that's why I've been doing it so long. Before it was cool, trendy, popular, or you could even make a buck in it, because I believe in the core concept of cleaner transportation, all the things that come with it. It's just a easier lifestyle, right? You don't have to go to this gas station. Electricity is flowing out of every building. And so the education part comes in. For example, the easiest one, everyone thinks about superchargers and fast chargers. And I'm like, the education plays a huge part. It's like, hey, wait, listen, like, we're not supposed to necessarily do that. That is a great bridge till level 2 gets built out everywhere. But you need to think about it this way, holistically. And so a lot of people just may not go for it because like, oh, but my neighbor's not doing it. No one else is doing it. Anup, I haven't heard anyone else talk about it. I'm like, I know that because everyone else is trying to drum up sales, build revenue, move on to the next action or trend. And I'm like, but if you want to do it right, I would love for you to listen to me. And it's a hard thing for me to tell someone like, hey, I'm the expert. I know this. I wouldn't say better than the next person, but it's just like, I know my message is not similar to the rest of the market or most of the market, because right now everyone's out chasing and building fast chargers, and I know that. And it's hard. Basically, I'll spend a lot of time educating. To your point, I would put it in you gave me a choice: sunken cost, and what was the other one?
Cost or is it a secret? Is education a secret weapon, or is it a sunken cost?
So I do think
Like,
it's a secret weapon, because where I'll say that I do win is like the very top type of clientele, right? So obviously that's in every product, every service. You're gonna have different pockets in a vertical, and some people value and ROI and returns. Some just value like, let's check a box, move on to the next thing, lowest cost. So I will say I'm winning with the folks who like understand longer term, have a vision, long term players, right? That's where I believe that Pangea Charging is winning.
you alluded to DCFC and L2. I want to come back to that in a moment, but just kind of a quick follow-up question to that. You're dealing with different sets of customers, different knowledge bases, different goals, different understanding of what it means to have. I mean, your target demographic in or multifamily properties. Where as a company trying to run lean, trying to be agile, how do you discern where to invest your knowledge and kind of who to walk away from? Have you developed a short list, as in checkpoints, let this is someone I don't need to spend 5 more minutes with, or how do you discern where to spend that time and where to run?
Yeah, I mean, and maybe someone watching will pick up on my tone throughout this whole conversation. I'm having to get stricter about everything because, to your point, we're in a very competitive and almost like survival point of this industry where everyone's like profitability, like longevity, repeat business. And so I think with your question is that I know that I love speaking with property managers at apartments. They're fun and they're easy to speak with, but they don't have the same incentives or the goals that, say, an asset manager or just really high up, right? Any C-level is like, how do I make money? How do I do this? And we want to replicate this at 60 properties. The property manager at property A doesn't care about B through Z, right? And their performance is not measured on it. So that's where I will cut conversations short. Like, I know there's a property I recently visited. I was like, hey, I've got all the numbers this time packaged. But what I'll share happens a lot is, here's the package. I actually had someone just recently. I sent a proposal and I asked, like, what is it you're trying to do? I got quantity of stations, but not like user experience, future proofing. What do we want to do in 3 years? So I said, okay, here you go. Like, here's a basic package for the 3 stations you need. Come to find out, hey, we're going with someone else. Like, I offer that. And I think I would have mentioned that in my calls. Like, I'm a one-stop shop. So whether you want Kit Kat or Snickers, I offer both. And so the fact that I proposed Kit Kat and you got one for Snickers and you go with Snickers, like, you could have just told me and I would have done it, right? And so to your point about, just how I go about that is I will cut it short if we don't understand requirements. If there's not like a defined criteria, it's like, okay, so we're just talking about very oblivious concept of EV charging, whether it's a socket, a level 2, a level 3, like I could throw you all over the place, but what is it that you want? And so that's when I usually know it's like, if you don't know what you want, how am I supposed to help you?
So you've had clairvoyance to your skill set, is what you're saying. You've had to add that to your skill set, is some clairvoyance and mind reading and all that.
Hold on while
Trying
I
to.
pull up Merriam-Webster. I feel like I've heard.
That's all right. Just basically reading minds. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's hard, and it's the discovery process with customers. When you're looking at multifamily communities, and if they don't have charging, how many chargers, what type of chargers, should the chargers be publicly accessible as well, or just for the residents? Do they charge, do they not charge? There's so many things that you have to walk through in that discovery process, and then that's not even into the technical and electrical construction process. That's just trying to understand what type of offering are you trying to bring to this community, and then to just get tied up in the minutia of the widget, of the actual charger, the features and
Right.
functions and wait list functionality, and what happens when people hold chargers captive. And so I would hope that some property managers and some others that would listen to this recording or watch this would consider so much that goes into the discovery process, and seek out industry professionals, and not look at it as just a widget, and not look at it as just an amenity. It's not a pool, it's not a
Right.
weightlifting room, it's not a workout room, it's not a dog park. It's something that's far more complex, with so many things to consider when it comes to the deployment of chargers, whether it's for one parking space, two parking space, or eight parking spaces. There's so much to go into it, and I know, because I've been involved in not necessarily at the scale you have, but I know what it's like to try to install chargers at multifamily communities. And wow, especially when they're retail adjacent, I've had a lot of experiences when it comes to getting them in the ground, and what all goes into that. Yeah, shifting topics, just kind of zooming out a bit, and looking at the industry as a whole. As an industry professional, you've been in the space, what, 10 years, 10
Mhm.
plus years. What are some of the biggest problems in the industry as it relates to EV charging now? Not just the EV charging infrastructure, EV adoption, the industry as a whole. There's misalignment. There's consumer thought processes. So just let's talk through that. What do you see? Kind of the state of the industry, where we're at right now.
So again, great question. And sometimes I wonder about our industry. Is like, I feel like we're getting to this point, and maybe I'm exacerbating it, but it's like this line in the sand is happening, which is those on. So we're all in the industry, but then I feel like people are standing up for their side of the industry, which is L3 versus L2. And I'm obviously going to be a strong advocate for the L2 side. And I think whether mostly what you see written about and what's publicized and what the general public will see, in my head, if you just take anecdotally what people will talk about, hey, yeah, and this is like, so I'll go from one extreme to the other, which is 7 years ago, 10 years ago, oh yeah, I've seen that charger at Walgreens or Whole Foods, and that was level 2. Now you see, oh yeah, I've seen some superchargers, and I saw some more come up over here. And so I think definitely post COVID, it's been a focus on L3. And I mean, I'll give you I mean, there's a lot I could say on this, but the problem to me is that story, that use case hasn't been built enough. So I'll give you a perfect example. I'm here at a co-working space, and kind of just all last minute plan to be here, but I knew coming in that they offer 2 hours of free complimentary charging with some charge point station out of the garage. And so, I probably commuted about 24 miles this way from home this morning, and I'm just pulling up the app right now, but let me see. I came in with 66 miles on my battery, 27%. So in the time we've been talking, plus a little more, I've recovered about 18 miles. So by the time we're done with this conversation, I'm going to actually recover everything it took me to get here, just to go right back. And so this story of just like living neutral, like what you burn, you can recover where you park. And I think there's just too much focus. It's like, oh yeah, but you can go to this like convenience store, this place, and grab a sandwich. Love that too. It absolutely has to be there. But my thing is, that's a very interstate travel situation. Here in any urban core in the city you live in, you're just not going to find me. This is why I showed up to the free station, this whole environment, because on the way home, I don't want to stop at a fast charger, sit and play on my phone for 30 minutes and pay almost 4x what it would cost to charge at home. So, just for those who are maybe new to the industry, I'm going to pay maybe 15 cents a kilowatt hour at home versus 60 cents, up to 60 cents or more at a fast charger. So it sounds like a little when you're talking about cents, but what I would pay on one fast charger site is maybe $60 for a full tank or battery versus spending $60 all month to charge up.
Well, didn't want to interrupt your train of thought, but to kind of, you threw some industry knowledge out there where you referred to L2 and L3, and then you also said DC fast or DCFC. So obviously DCFC and L3 are synonymous terms. They refer to DC fast charging, three phase 480 volt type of infrastructure, whereas L2 is AC based charging, so a much slower charge. And so where you're at right now in this co-working space is offering an AC based level 2 charging, and so that's recovering your energy while you're there, and which will deplete by the time you get back to where you're going, which sound like maybe is home, where you will plug in and start to recover and build back. But when you start thinking about that from the, because kind of going back to the question about what are some of the challenges, and that speaks to that EV adoption barrier. That's one of the barriers to entry, is the consumer thinking, is consumers thinking that charging has to be always available, has to be frictionless as gas, and yet they don't understand not only the charging technology, they don't understand the experience. We have this institutional knowledge because we've been in this space. So we're talking L2 DCFC, charging, replenishment, blah blah blah, and it's institutional knowledge gained over time and through experience. But that's the barrier, and that ties back to that education, that from a business development standpoint. But if we're struggling with education as it relates in a business to business context, wow, think about it in a business to consumer aspect. And that's one of the things. What I also see is, kind of going back to that business to business context, is the site hosts, whether they're going to own the property, or excuse me, own the equipment, own the assets, or site hosts that just want revenue from chargers, but they think of it as just like a vending machine. You install it and you forget it and walk away from it. It's just going to be out there working perfectly. And that's
Yeah.
absolutely not the case. That's the reason why companies like Field Advantage exist, is because they're not vending machines, set it and forget it. They break. There's a lot of friction points and a lot of wear and tear, just like a gas pump, where people are touching them all day long and messing with them, and using them the right way, and maybe not using them the wrong way. Same thing with EV chargers. And so EV chargers get put in the ground, they get it used and abused, and they break, and they need to be maintained. There's preventative maintenance needs, etc. That's why companies like Field Advantage exist, to keep them operational. And so there's I think kind of going back to the question about what's going on in this space. What are the problems in this industry? What are the problems? What are some of the other problems that you see? Maybe as it relates to, maybe we narrow this question down to the EV companies that are overselling capabilities and under delivering reliabilities, whether that's on the hardware or software side. What could you speak to in that respect?
Yeah, so I definitely am not I call it like data nerd. I wish I was. Like, I love seeing the folks who post all kinds of reliability uptimes, and I'm just so because again, I think a lot of that often speaks to L3 DCFC, as you pointed out. By the way, thanks for clarifying that, because I can't stand it when industry speaks in all acronyms and jargon. But so I think again, kind of. So you said, sorry, what was the last question you asked?
Well, I was just talking about, some of the barriers to the progress of this industry as a whole, and I alluded to maybe EV companies that are overselling capabilities and under delivering on
Yeah,
what their solution is, whether that solution be a hardware solution, a software solution, or whatever that may be. And
sure.
and that is not just an unfair statement. We can zoom out and see that is proven by reduction in force, bankruptcies,
Yep.
mergers and acquisitions, and so forth.
Yeah. And that's why it's interesting, because that again ties back to what we talked about the earlier part, is like going to a company where it's like, how do you know you're not just at a place that's pumping up everything to deliver for some investor or shareholder, and then it's like, boom, we did that, or we failed, and like we pumped it up and we can't deliver. And so I was like, I'm just done doing that. And I take clients, it's kind of, I bite what I can chew, right? Which is like, if I say I can do this list of things, you're going to make sure, or I'm going to make sure I do all these 10 things with this one client before I take on the next client. And so, it is a very land grab like industry right now. And I'm sure that's how everyone feels. It's like, let's promise them everything and do everything. And then you can hire people and further secure more further investment if you have this book of business. But I think at some point, I would love to see where more of the industry is just like we focus on laser focus on this one thing. And I think everyone would be like in a better position because at least there's alignment on like I hired you or used and procured you for this one thing. Now I get it. People want a one-stop shop, but at least versus we're good at everything. I mean, how good is that working out right now, right? I mean, hey, we service fleets, retail, we do software for this, like, but are you satisfying everyone? Or are you just middle grounding everybody's like, everyone's just now, unfortunately, complaining and killing your brand online with reviews. And I mean, right, we can all look at PlugShare and all kinds of reviews on companies. I see it on Facebook groups all the time, like so-and-so doesn't do this, doesn't live up to that. So yeah, I think I would love to see it. I had commented on someone's post the other day on LinkedIn. Is like, who's responsible for the education? And I honestly didn't know that answer. Someone had pointed out utilities. They're the ones responsible for this. Or someone had suggested they should carry that burden because it's like, are private companies supposed to or nonprofits supposed to? So I found that interesting is that I don't hear a lot from utilities. I mean, I'm also in Texas, so it's like maybe somewhat fragmented, whereas someone in California is like, hey, it's PG&E or Duke Energy in Florida. But yeah, I don't see as much involvement. Maybe I don't follow these people. Maybe it doesn't cross my desk, but that was an interesting insight for me.
Yeah, this is going to be maybe to some an inflammatory statement by me, but and probably to some an oversimplification. But I've looked at utilities as that midstream and upstream future oil or future fuel supplier. I mean, when you think of traditional petroleum fueling, you've got obviously the retailers, those that are selling the fuel at the dispenser. But then when you look at how petroleum is made into fuel that is sold at the retail level, you've got midstream and upstream oil. And so it's almost like electrons are the fuel source for the EV. And so naturally, utilities are part of that value chain of fuel. And it's like utilities should be at kind of the front line of deployment of chargers and leading and guiding. And this is a regional thing. And, obviously I'm not going to try to pick a fight with utilities with this statement, but it's like there's some utilities laying the tracks while the train is boarding. In some sense, it's like they're laying the train tracks, but the people are getting on board, ready to go somewhere. And
Right.
shout out to our friends at Austin Energy for what they've done, because they're kind of an outlier when it comes to a municipal owned that has incentivized. They educate the community. They kind of done their part at a municipal level to get chargers out in the wild and to incentivize businesses to put chargers in. So we need that at scale, whether a utility is owned municipally or co-ops or whatever. And early on in the EV space, when I first got started in the EV space, I'm thankful because I was able to cut my teeth in getting chargers deployed, and I found success in partnering with some very forward-thinking co-ops. And co-ops that were they had service territories that were covering kind of these remote areas, and they viewed it as, hey, we can sell these devices that dispense energy, and that's why we exist, is to sell energy. And so
Yeah.
it's like we can go to our customers in our service territory and help facilitate the deployment of these chargers. And so I was selling chargers in conjunction with these co-ops to move chargers out and into the wild, and it helped me learn this industry. It helped me learn about technology. It helped me learn about the deployment processes. But it also, you learn about all the nuances of getting chargers out into the wild and all the stuff that goes with that. But I think I want to kind of go back to a technology discussion, because you earlier alluded to the nuances in between L2 and L3, between level 2 charging and DC fast charging. And so I know when I first got into this industry years ago, but even today, I hear it. I've heard it today that some predict the end of level 2 charging. And so again, to just for
Oh,
the
wow.
audience to frame this up, level 2 charging is AC based charging, which is charging that is slower than DC fast charging. And so it's operating on 208, 240, 277. And depending on the state of charge of the electric vehicle, at the time it's plugged in, you're looking at incremental energy based on the size of the battery pack and, of course, the state of charge when it's plugged in. So we like to say 30 to 40 to 50 miles of range per hour is what we like to use for a baseline in level 2 context. But that obviously has other factors involved. But
Mhm.
anyways, years ago and even today, some say that L2 is ending and they claim everything will be DC fast charging in public, which I've didn't agree with years ago and I don't agree with today. And I think that that's short sighted and reductive in thought. But then others claim that most charging will always happen at home. And so, public DC charging is overhyped. And so, you're in the trenches, you've been in the trenches. Who's getting it wrong? And what's the nuance that they're missing from either side?
Yeah. Interesting. I actually hadn't, I almost wanted to write an article about how L3 will eventually die off. So I didn't know someone was
Interesting.
talking about
Well,
L.
say more to that. Say more to that. Yeah.
I think just again, this is like these interactions I have. My opinions are shaped by just real life and conversations, right? So it's not like I'm deeply studying this. I've got a business to run, but I would say that L3 is like this. I think if I'm using this term right, the stopgap. It's this bridge until there's mass adoption. Because I'm honestly just so incredibly shocked. So Tesla's done something really great, but at the same time is a disservice to like the EV industry, which is to sell their cars. They said, great, we got to make it easy. And how do you make it easy? We don't shift your behavior. We just tell you there's this plot of land with 30 fast chargers. You go there, you fill up, and you go home. And so people, of course, easily adopt that. I love the car. This is not an inconvenience because I know what go into a place, but it's almost this trade-off. Amazing, sexy electric car. Fine. I spend an extra 20 minutes at this fast charger. That's fine. I've been shocked by how many people I've stopped to speak at fast chargers, and I'll ask them, do you have a home charger? And they're like, no. And I'll say, wouldn't that be more convenient? And they're almost like, they're just like indifferent. They're almost like, this is life. Coming to this fast charger is normal. This is how it's supposed to be done. And it blows my mind because someone, and that someone is really the industry, hasn't said home charging. That is like, you just have to have that. That is a must to me in the electric vehicle world. Everyone that I know that's human goes to bed, whether that's 5 hours or 10 hours. That's a great time to recover what you did all day of driving. Let that fast charger be that 20% we talk about, 80% at home, 20%. But yet the focus of the industry is completely reversed. It seems like 80% are focused on fast charging and very little on L2, at least from a headlines and press perspective. So yeah, I honestly thought like I have a post to share. I mean, I saw a fast charger site that's nearly popped up. So whether the marketing isn't out yet or people just aren't seeing value, which I know there's plenty of Uber rideshare drivers that could use more fast charging in the city of Houston, but it's just not seeing the uses. There's 20, maybe 30 ports empty. So it's kind of like, why is that? Did you over deliver on the basis that maybe rideshare drivers would use this and people visiting town? Or did you expect people who live in the city to use it? Because everyone I speak with that's, call it like professional world, white collar, and they have a Tesla or any other EV, they're like, no, I would never use a fast charger. I charge at home. And so that's, to me, what's interesting is that however you want to cut and slice that demographics or what, schools of thought are like, I'm going to charge at home, or some people, I'm going to fast charge. And I feel like the fast charger ones are people who do live at multifamily who don't have access. So they're having to resort to that. But I think as soon as more L2s come online, then you start to see L3s get somewhat of a desert, honestly.
That's an interesting perspective. And I think, honestly, the use case is inseparable from the use case of the technology is inseparable from the experience. And by that, I mean, okay, what's happening with level two? It's charging where you're at. It's charging where you're parked. What's the stat around the life of a vehicle? It's parked 95% of its lifespan.
Right.
A car spends 95% of its life
Park.
parked somewhere. So 5% of its lifespan is spent in motion. That's absurd. So it makes sense
Right.
that it would spend the bulk of that time charging, which from that standpoint, it would make sense that that charging would happen on level two.
Right.
And then so that's one aspect of the experience. The other aspect of the experience is that DC fast charging is there for those that need to travel beyond the range of their battery. whether it's across town or across state. You and I live in Texas. We can drive for 7 to 8 to 9 hours and still be in our state,
Right.
and so when we travel beyond the range of our battery, we are dependent upon level 3 DC fast charging. But again, that is experiential, and that is that happening often? Is that happening all the time? How often do we drive 7 to 8 to 9 hours? Not all the time. That's an
Right.
event, not a pattern. So, the
I like that.
idea of DC fast charging as being overhyped, maybe overhyped is too strong a word. I really honestly think that when we try to position level 2 against level 3, I think that that's kind of like whiplash around thought leadership. I think that's thought
Yeah.
leadership gone wrong. I think it's technological bias. I think that really it's looking at use around the site. When we go back to that conversation that we had earlier around consumer thought, the gas station experience, that the gas station experience absolutely has to mirror the EV charging experience, where I pull up to a gas pump, I'm there for 3 minutes tops, because the gas pump is dispensing 22 to 23 gallons per minute. That's how much. And so when we think about that, what is that ratio as it relates to the dispensing of electrons? It's not even comparable, because with petroleum you're dispensing a liquid fuel into a vehicle. With charging, the vehicle is requesting energy from the dispenser. So it's a completely different transference of energy. And you've got a smart device communicating with another device requesting energy. So there's conversation happening, you could say. And so it's never going to mirror, and it's never going to mirror itself. So, it's not about, I don't think it's supposed to mirror. I think it's about these charge destinations thinking about that experience. And so what are they doing? You said, hey, I want to charge where I'm at, and then I got to go home and I'll reach at home. I don't really want to stop at a level 2 charger and play on my phone. I don't want to spend that time. I'd rather charge.
Right. And I was thinking, it's like, I know you're a frequent guest of the gym, and I feel like if these gyms had it, I mean, every day getting, I'm sure most people at the gym, 45 minutes to an hour and a half. So imagine every day consistently, I'm going to recover 20 miles in that time at the gym. Phenomenal. Again, that's
Yep.
like a lot of people's, in smaller cities, might be their whole commute for the day.
Yep.
And, I'll give you an example. Obviously, as two comedy fans, obviously we know each other. I went to see Ralph Barbosa last night. I don't know if you follow him. He's a Texas
Oh,
comedian.
yes. Yes, I do know who that is. Yeah. Yes, I do.
And so I was there last night. Battery range was again, and I just hadn't had a chance to charge at home the last day. And I was at that show from park to leaving. I mean, let's see. I got there at 30 and I left at 11:30, so 2 hours, right? Again, same thing. Would have recovered my going and coming back. So like my round trip, if that place had a charger. And so yeah, it's just if there, and it got me thinking. I've kind of said this or shared this sometimes, but it doesn't hurt to maybe say it again, which is we talk about charging your car should be a lot like your cell phone. Now, that's fine, but I think what we need to tell people, how silly and outlandish would it be if I said, hey, Jason, that phone you've got, how about if I told you you could go fast charge it in 15 minutes, but you got to leave your house to do it? How much of a priority is that for you to have to like go charge your phone versus like the hour, 2 hours, you could get it done in like 8 minutes, but you got to go away from out of your routine, away from your home to this special destination to fast charge your cell phone. Is that reasonable? I don't know.
No, well, when you frame it that way, it's certainly an impractical use of charging. I need to be able to charge where I'm at, whether that's home or out in the market. So yeah, certainly a good way to a good perspective when it comes to that. And so when we look at these public charging destinations, if this ties into that customer experience, if I'm having to go charge somewhere, because one of the pushbacks I know that you get, I've got it as well, and this is more from the antagonist at a broader level to EV as a whole. What about the people that can't charge at home because they don't own their home, so they can't put in a charger, or they live in multi-family communities and they won't put in chargers because the property management company flips the property every 2 years, so they won't invest in charging, or they only have street parking, or they live in a townhome community, or whatever the scenario is. There's absolutely no access to home charging. What about them? And so there's narratives for that. You've encountered that pushback, and again, that's usually that pushback from those that are antagonistic towards EV as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
But that is a legitimate question, because it can be a barrier for those that
Right.
do live in those spaces that do want to drive an EV.
Right. And And, I think that's what's interesting because so then it's like, again, a question of numbers, which is, I think, the number I'll typically see is about 30, unlikely to be more than 40% live in multifamily communities, condo apartments. Majority is 60%. Where do those 60% live? Single family homes, means of a charger. And I feel like we could do more of that. I'm sure people in that space or those demographics are considering it. But yeah, I think until multifamily adopts it in a big way, it does become restrictive because, yeah, I mean, I can't see myself living in an apartment, not having access to home charging. I wouldn't be getting an electric vehicle. Because it isn't practical. Life is already busy for most people, so it's like if you add this to my plate, it's unlikely because life is fine in a gas car until you have to like change significantly your behaviors, right? There could be all kinds of reasons why people want to do it, but I can see why that's a big barrier. If you don't have home charging, that's probably the biggest, in my opinion, of why someone wouldn't want to.
Well, I got a couple more questions. This last one is 30, 40 second response, and you got to pull out your crystal ball for this one.
Uh,
Just give me your best shot. What's a blind spot in this industry, or maybe infrastructure that no one's talking about that you think will matter in 2 to 3 years? In other words, what is not getting enough attention right now that you think we're gonna kind of see the results of later, kind of the fruit of it later, 2 to 3 years
yeah.
from now?
So two thoughts initially come to mind. One is blind spot. I've spoken about it all conversation, which is L2. So I think
Okay.
blind spot is, hey, there's more value in offering L2 everywhere versus a couple places of L3. So I think that's one. Number two, this is not an area I'm the expert in yet today, but I think and I wish more was spoken about it. And I know it's being piloted across the country in certain regions, vehicle to grid or V to X, right? So I just have kind of layman's terms talked to property managers like, hey, but how about it's one thing to deliver power to these cars, but what happens in a situation like the storms we get in Houston or across Texas where power goes out? What happens if those 18 cars out there could suddenly reverse the flow of energy and keep the lights on in this building that we're all kind of huddled in until the storm passes and the lights are out? At least we can stay comfortable, lit up, fans, AC, etc. Right? So I'd love to see, I think that's a huge value for real estate owners to realize, but myself included is not super knowledgeable about it yet. But I think in 2 to 3 years, we'll definitely be there.
Great. Well, Noob, I appreciate your time. Before we wrap up here, anything interesting, fun on the horizon for you? What are you working on? Anything you can share with us before we close out this call?
Yeah, sure. So, as a friend, both personal and just even in the industry, I wanted to make sure to utilize this opportunity to drop some exciting news that Pangea Charging's up to, which I know you haven't heard because I just shared that I would like to share some news. So, I don't know if you know this. I'd be curious actually if this is on your radar. Is World Cup on your radar? Have you thought about that much?
To be honest, as I don't follow any sports, so soccer or football, however you call
Yeah.
it, I don't know even how you call it.
Both.
And I don't follow football, soccer. Yeah, I don't follow any sports, but
Yeah.
yeah.
So
So no.
okay, and I believe that's the case for many people. So it's same thing on the sports side for me. The reason it's on my radar though is I'm in Houston, fourth largest city. It is one of the host cities. So if you take and package and summarize everything we spoke about in this call, I am basically trying to deliver the realities of L2 charging and how it shapes EV charging, the EV infrastructure, and the ease of life to live that. All that to say is I would love for your viewers and your network to check out electricworldcup2026.com. And that effort is actually to promote and highlight specifically restaurants and hotels that are EV friendly and that have charging access, because what are folks going to do in these host cities of the World Cup? They're going to definitely be going to stay at a hotel because they're coming from all over the world. And so we didn't even touch on that, but hotels are a big access point of needing L2 charging. And then, of course, restaurants. And that kind of came to me because here in Houston, I talk a lot about this as well, as it's got its own culture, but what it seems to be known for is a lot of food and different types of food. So when people come here, they explore restaurants. And I can point to an example of when you were in town. This was like maybe 4 years ago. You and I were in this building at the Ion, and you said, "Hey, Noop, love to go grab dinner, but I need a charge." And we looked for, I don't know if you remember that, but we looked for a restaurant and we ended up at a place called Sichuan Bistro or Mala Sichuan. And they had a charger at
Yep.
MKT here in Houston. You plugged in, And that's the experience I want to amplify for everybody. When you've got millions of people in these cities for the World Cup, renting EVs, driving on their own EVs, and they're like, I'm scrambling around town to make events, make games, meet my buddy at the sports bar. I don't want charging to be a friction point. Oh, cool. This place has it. So all that to say is that we'll be promoting and working with restaurants and hotels to implement EV charging ahead of World Cup 2026.
Nice, nice. So to frame this up, so I make sure I understand, you are consolidating all the charging destinations around food and hospitality, and you're bringing that into a central place anchored around the World Cup, and you're going to promote that. And so that way, EV drivers that are there in town for that are going to be able to go to a place to know where to shop, eat, work, or stop and play to charge. Is that what I'm
Yeah.
understanding?
So there's obviously apps out there that promote this in a way that's very like there's a charger in this destination. So I'm basically creating a curated list where I'm actually targeting as Pangea Charging, going after, hey, the top 5 Tex-Mex restaurants, the top 5 barbecue restaurants,
Nice,
and saying, hey,
nice.
we know people are going to be coming to check you out, but you're going to have this added benefit against the competition when you offer charging. Hey, consult and use Pangea Charging to get this implemented. We will include you on this curated list. So yes, the main requirement is working with Pangea Charging to put in new stations, but this is a very narrow but I think strategic play of like showing these folks the value.
Nice. Well, that's fantastic, and thanks for sharing that with us. We'll add a link. We'll attach the link, so it'll be in with the description of this, so where this lands on our platform. So we'll be sure to
Sweet.
include that. We'll help promote that. So
Awesome.
thank you. Well, Anup, thanks for being on Field Frequency. It's been a pleasure to chat with you as always, and appreciate having you. Thanks for sharing your knowledge. Thanks for sharing your time.
Yeah,
Where can people keep up with your content?
yep. The best go-to place where I'm most active is definitely LinkedIn. So make sure to follow me on LinkedIn as Anup Parikh. And then if you'd like to see more multifamily and EV charging specific content, that would be Pangea Charging's page on LinkedIn. But definitely available on YouTube. What else we got? And Instagram. But I'd say the most two are LinkedIn and YouTube.
Right. Thanks a lot, Anup.
You
Appreciate
bet.
your time.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.